Okay. You ready? Let's do this. You're listening to Explore Magazine's Live the Adventure podcast. This is the podcast that delves deep into the outdoors, will inspire, inform, and get you stoked to explore. And I'm your host, David Webb. Welcome to episode 18 of Explore Magazine's Live the Adventure podcast. I'm your host, David Webb. You know, some of my most vivid dreams have been of flying. I recall flying dreams from decades ago like they were from last night. I think a fascination with flight is part of the human experience. Birds, planes, butterflies, and paragliders. Today we're going to talk about those last two things, butterflies and paragliders. My guest is Benjamin Jordan. Ben's an adventure paraglider and filmmaker based in southeastern BC. Among many paragliding expeditions, which we'll talk about, he recently completed a flight expedition from the Mexican border across the continental US right up to Canada, following the migration path of the Monarch Butterfly. He filmed this adventure for an upcoming documentary, hoping to learn about monarchs and flying along the way. He covered 2,850 kilometers, which included some 600 kilometers of hiking, through regions he'd never flown or even been in, as a pandemic broke out around him. So it was a challenge, but he learned a lot. As you're about to find out, Benjamin Jordan is always learning. So stay tuned as we chat about how he started in the world of paragliding, about long-distance expedition travel, and about the plights and the flights of the Monarch Butterfly. Benjamin Jordan, thank you for joining me today on Explore Magazine's Live the Adventure podcast.
Thanks for having me, David. This is awesome.
Do you want to take a minute and just introduce yourself to our listeners?
Yeah, let's do that. Hey, I'm Ben. I live to paraglide and paraglide to live. Over the last 15 years, I've just been focused on taking this incredible sport to the furthest limits that I can. Some of the exciting adventures that I've been on in the last 5 have been self-supported fly camping trips that I'll do upwards of 1,000 kilometers. So for instance, one from Vancouver to Calgary was very exciting, across all of southwestern Canada's mountain ranges. A couple years after that, I flew from the US-Canada border all the way up to Prince George, flying in and out of British Columbia, Alberta, along our continental divide. Incredible trip. First complete flight over Jasper National Park, and the first complete flight along that entire section of mountains here in Canada. And we're going to get into it in this episode, but it just gets crazier and crazier. For me, it's all about just keeping it simple, hiking with everything that you need, and then flying with everything that you need, and just trying to make it from point to point. And at the same time, if I can, raise awareness around things that are happening in our environment that are important to me and that I believe are important to all of us, then I'll make a point to do that as well. I make films to support myself, and so about each of these expeditions, there are films that are out there that people can download, and just get stoked.
I've seen a few of your films and watched some of the trailers recently, and I'll definitely let our listeners know where they can access some of those trailers and go from there. But paragliding, so you live to paraglide and you paraglide to live. So why?
Well, that would go all the way. That would go all the way back to where I was born. I was born in Toronto. Pretty much out of high school, I became a commercial fashion and advertising photographer. I ran that racket for about 6 years, and just kind of got a little bit too much into the groove of it. Was feeling kind of depressed. Made some mistakes. Got evicted from my apartment. Crashing on my cousin's couch, trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life, and I saw a paraglider on a TV set. What I actually heard in the back of my head was, "You can't do that." I decided to challenge that voice because I was so familiar with the voice that said, "You can't do that," that I actually didn't even hear it at first. And so I said, okay, why can't I do this? Why? And I made this list. So I was too fat, couldn't do it in Canada, it was too expensive, it was hella dangerous, all these reasons. And so apparently I was this expert on why I couldn't do this thing that I had no idea about. And so I went online, I looked to validate any one of these points, and they were all wrong. And what I concluded was that I was really just afraid. And it wasn't a problem for me that I was afraid of this thing, but what was a problem for me was that I was afraid of it and I couldn't admit to myself that I was afraid of it. So kind of as a punishment, and to see what would happen if I just threw my hat over the wall and forced myself to do one of these things that I was afraid of but couldn't admit to myself that I was afraid of, not because I loved it, not because I loved the idea of it, just to see what would happen. I signed up for a course, signed up for a paragliding course. And literally 1 week later, I'm down in the North Island of New Zealand. It was winter in Canada at the time. I'm down in New Zealand, west of Auckland, and I'm stepping off a cliff for the first time. And I'm telling you, David, the feeling that I had, of course, I was only 25 at the time, so I didn't know a whole lot about love. But I can only describe that feeling as the feeling of falling in love instantly.
Wow.
And so what that meant for me was not just that I loved paragliding. That was obvious, but it was that the things that I feared were in fact the things that I was just waiting to love if I would push myself past that boundary. And so paragliding for me has always been the staple kind of headquarters of my life and the place that I'll always go back to. But really, I just use that as a vehicle to continue pushing into that space of fear, to continue seeking that emotion of love. So that's why.
Wow, that's a very interesting why. What's interesting to me though, when you think about that, when you look at paragliding and like you said before about the reasons that you can't do it, one of those things was it's dangerous or there's a fear there. And I hear a lot of people talking about this mindset of pushing themselves into something they're afraid of, but it's often a very emotional and metaphorical fear that they're dealing with. Whereas paragliding, I mean, it is dangerous, right? Like you're not out of your mind in saying that there is an inherent danger there of flying through the sky. So that must still exist, right? I mean, you're still aware, like you haven't pushed past that danger, or does it not exist as much for you anymore?
Well, I would actually argue that it doesn't exist all that much, period. And that any fear that we might be able to discuss is really at the end of the day entirely emotional, because with paragliding, and this could probably be associated with all sorts of things that I'm not familiar with, as a step-by-step thing that you get introduced to and then elevate yourself within, you're always just playing within what is an acceptable margin of risk. Your first flight could be just 2 meters off the ground from the top of a sand dune to the bottom. Now 10 years later you're flying in the Rocky Mountains. But when I'm sitting here thinking about paragliding, when I'm talking to you about dangling from ripstop nylon from about 100 strings, way up in the atmosphere, I feel afraid. I think about that and I think about everything that could go wrong, and I could be completely immersed in fear. I feel that way. But when I'm actually doing that thing, I am so consumed inside of what it is that I'm doing. I'm so present to that moment of the action that I don't have any more brain cycles left to process feelings like fear. I'm so involved in it. And so I feel like, we can have a conversation about how scary paragliding is till the cows come home. There's lots of things that can feel scary about it when you're sitting around talking about it. But it's this incredible thing that when you're actually doing the thing, that fear is just not there. I don't know how else to describe that.
No, I totally get that. I 100% get that. I've never been paragliding before, but certainly there has been things from backcountry skiing in an avalanche area, or I used to be a bit more into adventure motorcycling and things like that. That sometimes when I think back or got nervous about something that I was going to do, it wasn't actually happening during that time. I can think back to the last time I went backcountry skiing. My wife was pregnant at the time, and she was kind of like, "You sure this is what you want to be doing while I'm pregnant with twins?" and then I was like, yeah, maybe I shouldn't be. And I got kind of scared. Like I found myself getting a little scared about the whole thing. But I'll tell you, I didn't think about it at all during the day. So I totally get I get exactly where you're coming from. It's an interesting thing though, because paragliding, I do feel from my perspective, it is such a niche sport and so specific. Like other than you and we have a columnist who I'm sure you're familiar with, Will Gadd, for Explorer magazine, and a few other people I've randomly met. I don't know any, like none of my friends paraglide, so it you know what I mean? Like no one in my inner circle paraglides on the regular. So maybe it is that sense that it is just this kind of like ethereal foreign thing to me that I see in the videos, and I'm like, wow, how do people? That's crazy. I can't believe they do that. But I get what you're saying. I definitely understand what you're saying and how you manage that fear and how you don't necessarily even experience that fear when at a moment then, when theoretically you should be experiencing it most of all in some ways, but you don't. Yeah,
totally. And just I'll just take this moment to just tout my massive respect for Will and all that he's accomplished. He's just been such an inspiration to me. In fact, it was when I first moved out west. It's a bit of a side story, but I rode a skateboard from Halifax to Vancouver. That's how I got away from the East Coast and got out west. And Explorer actually ran a small piece on that, to which I had delivered to my residence in Vancouver where I was renting. And there was a little article decent article called Will's World. And I remember I read that, and it was all about him, and it was an interview with him. And I was so inspired by him, and I was inspired by that article. I remember being so insecure. I was 26 at the time, and just thinking like, well, I didn't know what I was going to do with my life out west now that I'd finally broken free from the mechanics of Toronto. And I remember thinking, I just got to be like that guy. And so a lot of what I've done ever since then has actually been very much inspired by many of the pioneering actions that he's taken in paragliding and outside of paragliding. So
yeah, he was actually sort of my first introduction to it in some ways too. When I worked on a different magazine about 16 years ago, he wrote a piece about going over, I think he flew from like Canmore to Golden or something like that in the early 2000s, and that was something I it was my first introduction to it. But I just want to circle back for something. You rode a skateboard from Toronto to Vancouver. Can we just circle back on that for a second?
Yeah, totally. I mean, okay, look, I got to tell you, I got to just backtrack a bit beyond that to give that the really the weight that it deserves, such that everyone can take something from that. Because I was on my cousin's couch, evicted of my apartment, depressed, not sure what I was going to do with my life, tired of fashion photography, saw the paraglider, you can't do that, pushed myself over the wall, came back to Toronto after 3 months of traveling around with my paraglider in New Zealand, literally just running up every mountain I could and hucking myself off. Come back to Toronto and it's like, and I realized like, okay, I've got no money. I don't like this life. I gave myself 1 year, I said, to work as hard as I can, save up as much as I can, and I'm going to find some way, somehow, some company is going to sponsor me to paraglide across Canada. And I quickly realized that I couldn't just launch off buildings. I was very novice. I was going to have to get this thing called a paramotor, so basically a small fan on my back.
Right.
And do that way. So I was going to get sponsors. I was going to do this thing. I was going to be so great. And 10 months go by, so I've got 2 months left to my takeoff date, and I've done literally nothing because I've just been scared crapless. And what I have done is I've been organizing these skateboarding events in Toronto. So I get this call from these guys that are going to skateboard across Canada. They've been organizing this thing. They want me to organize a skateboarding rally for them in Toronto because they're fundraising for the Breast Cancer Foundation, Canadian Breast Cancer Foundation. So I tell them, yeah, I'll do that. And I hang up the phone and I think to myself, wait a second, they're going to skateboard all the way across Canada? I thought, I can't fly a paraglider across Canada. I have no idea how I would do that, but I could skateboard across Canada. And I looked at what they had online. I thought, you know what, these guys need a great photographer. And so at the last minute, I said, guys, will you let me do this? Can I be your documentary maker? I'll skateboard the whole way. And they said yes. And that was my ticket out. That was how I finally got away from the city. And that was how I finally broke into the world of basically professional adventuring and adventure documentary. It was called Push for the Cure. And we rode over 5 months and 9 days from Halifax all the way to Vancouver and raised over $1 million in all for the Canadian Breast Cancer Foundation. 5 of us were all about 25 at the time. And it was just an incredible thing to do. And I love that story because it really did kickstart my life. And I wanted so badly to fly a powered paraglider across Canada that I almost rejected the idea of skateboarding across Canada as some sort of like a lesser thing. But what I didn't realize at that sort of tender age was that skateboarding across Canada was a bold step, yet at the same time it would be a baby step towards that goal, because everything I learned inside of that, and I learned so much that summer, so much, is what ultimately allowed me to 3 years later actually live that dream and fly a powered paraglider all the way from Tofino to St. John's, Newfoundland.
Wow.
And so it's so important to see those opportunities when they knock and to understand that sometimes, the short way isn't always the best way. As a skier, I'm sure you know about looking for awkward lines and the powder that exists behind some of those really awkward lines,
When you trained down in New Zealand and then you started flying around New Zealand for a bit and you came back, how long was the progression then? If I'm trying to figure out in my mind some of the things you've said, from being like student, novice, to really feeling like you were capable of big expeditions.
That was a very long progression, I will say. Of course, when you're brand new, you think that you're capable of anything, right? And it's this weird sort of almost upside down learning curve where you're kind of accelerating, and then you realize like, oh, I've got nothing. I'm actually below, square one here. So. I learned down in New Zealand. You learn in 2 weeks. That's the crazy thing. If you get good conditions and you can fly every single day, so 14 days, you're signed off. You're a novice paraglider pilot. You can fly wherever you want by yourself.
And did you feel like you could after 2 weeks? Like you really felt like confident and like you had the skills?
Yeah, looking back at myself, I would say, hell no, I didn't. But then I did. Mm-hmm. And keep in mind, I'd only learned to fly on a coastal site. So you're basically just flying sand dunes, large sand dunes, like 30-meter sand dunes, but still cliffs. And that's really easy because there's no turbulence. You're literally just flying like a seagull up and down a coast. You can go for kilometers without really even steering. Now going to the South Island, to the middle of the South Island, some of those larger mountains, I remember being there in Mount Cook National Park and what was the other one? I forget. Avalanche Peak and Willard's Pass or something. I remember just hiking up there with all of my tent and everything and my big backpack and just like running, like a banshee off the side of the mountain and somehow getting away with it. But I was definitely in over my head. And when I went back to Toronto, I wasn't able to fly for that whole year. And then I skateboarded for half a year across Canada. And then I finally started getting my feet wet when I got back out west. But that was in 2006. My first big expedition that I referenced, which was from Vancouver to Calgary, that was really my first big professional sort of sponsored journey that I documented well. And that happened in 2016. So I'd say that was a 10-year period of traveling all around the world, Europe, Asia, like in Mexico here, and learning to fly in all different types of terrain, all different types of air, and putting that together. Doing some smaller trips, the year prior to that, 2015, I did a 2-night journey, which was basically just flying from New Denver, Idaho Peak there in New Denver, which you may be familiar with, across to the Macbeth Glacier area, and then from there another day going landing high, then the next day going and flying over the Bugaboos and flying to Golden, those kinds of things. But that's 2 days, right? Now all of a sudden XBC, Vancouver to Calgary, that's 39 days. Endless Chain, which was from Montana to Prince George, 52, and now this latest journey that we'll talk about, 150 days. So I'd say it took about 10 years to get to a point where I felt like, okay, I'm ready to do this. This is what I've been dreaming of since day one. When my paragliding instructor, before I met her down in New Zealand, spoke to me, she said, we're going to order you a paraglider. What kind of paragliding you want to get into? I just said straight up, I want to fly down the entire length of the Rocky Mountains. I didn't know what that would entail, but I just figured I'm going to fly all the way across the United States on a paraglider. We are 16 years later, and that's finally a reality.
Yeah, that's an interesting look at the sport, though, that it seems like it's a sport that you can get started in fairly easily, but then the learning progression is very, very, very long. But it's interesting to know that you can get started in it very easily, because it has this unattainable feel, I think, to the average person. Definitely to me, and I feel like I'm not alone and looking at the paragliders and just thinking like you said early on, they're like, oh, I can't do that. I can't do that. There is something unattainable feeling about it. So it's interesting to hear you say that you actually can just kind of jump into it and get going if you want.
Literally just, if you have really good conditions, so different if you're trying to learn up in Canada where you get, maybe you can fly 1 day a week, in the season because of, what's okay for a beginner, for instance, right? But if you get really good conditions, you could be signed off in a couple weeks. And it doesn't have to be expensive either. That was a big thing. If you buy, some quality used equipment, which you can often get through schools, you could be, up and running for, a couple grand. And as far as safety is concerned, the thing that what they teach you in school is they teach you what not to do, that so that you don't get hurt. They explain turbulence. They explain, what can go wrong on launch, what can go wrong in landing, what can go wrong in flight. From there, you just piece it together on your own and like bit by bit and through talking to other people in the community. So it's like 2 weeks to learn and then like a lifetime to master. And in your first year, you know, you don't see movies about Will Gadd's first year of paragliding, right? Like you see him as like a guru, right? In those movies. But, you know, I can't say for his first year, but a lot of people's first years, you know, you're just flying from top to bottom from a mountain, you know, skying out through the air, turning a million times over a big farm field and landing somewhere in the middle of it. It's super safe, but because that's the best that you've ever done, you feel like the best pilot in the world, right? And it's just a slow progression from there. And then eventually, you know, if you keep at it, then you become that guy who's flying along the Rocky Mountains, you know, in a movie.
Yeah, it sounds like you've done a lot of incredible expeditions, and I know people can find out some of those on your website. But the one thing I wanted to focus on right now, Monarch Expedition, what is it?
Yeah, it's super exciting. Just finished this. Basically, the Monarch Expedition is the very first paraglider journey from Mexico to Canada. So the first crossing of the entire United States by paraglider, done unsupported, and literally just carrying my paraglider, my food, my water, my camping equipment, my camera equipment on my back, hiking up a mountain just north of the Mexican border, launching off that mountain and doing everything I can to connect with Mother Nature in a way that I understand what I need to do to gain elevation so that I can fly north and then do that again and again and again and again.
But the expedition wasn't simply about going across the United States. The name, the Monarcha, you were following the migration path of the Monarch Butterfly. Can you tell us a bit about that, why you chose to do that, and what that meant to you?
I'm flying down in Mexico. There's this place called Valle de Bravo, where paragliders from all around the world gravitate to every winter. And the reason is that it has some of the most consistent flying conditions anywhere. If you go there for a month, you literally fly 30 out of 30 days. So it's a great place for people to go on flying vacations or to train or what have you. So I'm there for those reasons. And one day I'm flying around this volcano, Nevado de Toluca, Toluca volcano, and I get shaded out by a whole bunch of cloud and I'm forced to land in this field, way up high at about 3,100 meters above sea level. So I'm landing, I'm packing my glider up, and I see all around me are these butterflies. And it's surprising to me because usually when you land in Mexico, you're swarmed by children. In this case, I'm being swarmed by butterflies, and they look a lot like the ones I'm familiar with back home in Ontario. We had these monarch butterflies. And so I'm thinking, that's weird. They all seem to be coming from a forest. So I pack up quick and I start walking towards the forest. And the further I get into the forest, the more dense they become until there's no more. And I look on the ground and there's monarch butterflies all over the ground. And some of them are kind of twitching on the ground. Many of them are clearly dead. And it's kind of like this really devastating feeling that I've come to think, what's going on here? What's going on? And I look around me and the forest looks so strange. Like the trees don't look real. All the branches are sagging. There seems to be a fungus everywhere. And I'm thinking, what's going on? And then the clouds kind of disperse a little bit and the sun comes down through the trees, and all of a sudden all of these trees go from being kind of bumpy and brown to orange, and all of these little bumpy brown things that were coating the trees, the trunks and the branches so much so that they're weighing the branches down with their weight are monarch butterflies. Literally millions upon millions of them. And the sun comes out, and I guess they love the sun, so now they're flying around, and I can't even hear the sound of the wind or the traffic anymore. All I can hear is the sound of millions and millions and millions of butterflies swarming all around me. So I'm just completely taken aback. I'm just fumbling, trying to grab my camera. You know, this is like a natural wonder. I can't believe what I'm finding here. And so I document it, and then I go and I start telling people, and they're like, oh yeah, the monarchs, yeah, they overwinter here. And I started doing more research, and I realized these monarchs have actually flown all the way to that mountain from Canada. And the craziest thing that I learned was that they do it every year, but it's not the same monarchs, because monarchs don't live all that long. And so the monarchs that had flown all the way to that very specific mountaintop in this Sierra Madre mountain region of Mexico, very, very specific, no bigger than the size of a playground. They had come from all over Canada in northern United States, flown all the way down there. They'd never seen it before. Their parents had never seen it before. Their parents had never seen it before. It was their parents that had been there the previous winter and somehow
That's incredible.
left, procreated several times now, several generations, such that the final one, it's enough that it can make it all the way across the United States, across the Great Lakes, do all of that as a butterfly with, the what seemed like the piloting skills of a Post-it note, with no GPS, no Google Maps. And here it is, able to pinpoint this place, not just the same country, not just the same region, the same bloody square kilometer that their great-grandparent spent the winter 1 year ago. And my mind was absolutely blown. Like I still shake when I think about this. And what became this obsession for me was thinking, okay, hold on. I eat humble pie every time I think about this. I thought the butterfly was just this kind of like haphazard kind of essentially just living napkin flying around in the wind without control. I didn't realize that it was a master at intergenerational, communication, let alone endurance. And I thought to myself, if this seemingly simple being possesses such an incredible trait, then every living being must have some special trait, but maybe that I'm ignorant to, or, the people that I know are ignorant to. Maybe deer, maybe owls, maybe trees, maybe me. And so what is my special trait? What do I have that would blow a monarch's mind? Other than like access to Nutella or something, right? Mm-hmm. And so I started asking myself this question, and I visited Mexico many times after that, and I kept thinking, what is it? What do I have? And I thought, the only way I'm going to find out is if I put myself in their shoes. So that's where the idea came from. And it was literally just to have an experience as close as I could to that of the Monarch Butterfly, and to fly all the way from Mexico to Canada without the use of fossil fuel, without anyone helping me along the way, in order to see what it would be that I would learn in that process.
And how long was it in distance and time?
It took 150 days, took 69 flights. Some flights I'm flying, 10 kilometers. Some flights I'm flying 100 kilometers. I never really know until the day. Some days I fly so little I have to walk back to the same mountain, and I have to wait there for 2 weeks for a good weather day to continue on. Probably 20 of those flights were go nowhere flights. So we can say it took maybe 50 actual cross country flights. Total distance 2,835 kilometers. About 2,200 of that was done by paraglider.
The rest on foot?
The rest, yeah, on foot, yeah. There were certain sections, for instance, across the national parks and monuments of northern Arizona there. I couldn't risk landing in Grand Canyon National Park or the Vermilion Cliffs National Monument, for instance. So right there, that was a 200 plus kilometer journey that I basically had to walk from the Navajo Nation all the way west to the west side of Zion National Park to be able to continue north to head towards the Wasatch. Another really long section, for instance, would be north of the Wasatch in that sort of central part of Idaho, where you have Idaho Falls, etc., and just a few small volcanic craters. They're actually a part of a huge nuclear test site that you're not supposed to be on, in order to connect to King Mountain and the Lost River Range and that whole mountainous section of Idaho. So there's some sections that I had to walk, but that's largely just because there was literally nowhere to launch from, mostly because they were, large and flat.
I was wondering if you felt, if as someone who flies yourself, you had felt a kinship with the butterfly.
There are a ton of similarities, I think, to humans and monarchs in general. But certainly I can relate from my own experience as a pilot. But that's just because, piloting is my sport. The aspect of being vulnerable was a huge thing for me on this expedition, because I was constantly vulnerable. Whether it was while flying in certain sketchy conditions, that I didn't want to be in, the same as I could imagine a monarch butterfly would be, perhaps potentially stuck in a storm, and they might be, taking a poop, in mid-flight as well. To other types of sketchy situations. For instance, I could be stuck up on a mountaintop that I had planned to fly off, but realize that I can't fly from there that day because of whatever circumstances. Could be the terrain, could be the weather, the wind. And now, I've burned through all of my 10 liters of water that I carried up there, and I'm on a mountaintop in the middle of Arizona, and, their mountaintops do not have water. And, being, at risk of severe dehydration for 24 hours until I'm able to hike all the way back down, and find a solution to my problem. And so certainly being vulnerable like that, I feel like I think that really was that thing that I was afraid of, and with respect to paragliding to begin with. And the experience of being vulnerable was the thing that led me to experience those overwhelming feelings of love that I'd spoken about earlier in the program. But at the same time, it can be very terrifying. And I feel like in those moments, probably the most I was relating to the plight of the Monarch Butterfly, because they're up against incredible odds.
Did you think about the butterfly? I mean, you mentioned earlier that you don't think about the fear, but while you were flying, were you thinking about the butterfly, or are you just totally engaged in that moment of flying when you're up there?
I think about a lot of things. It's funny. I actually spend, it's kind of embarrassing to say, I spend a fair bit of time thinking about pizza when I'm on expedition, because it's just like the one thing that I just cannot get. I eat mostly peanut butter and ramen noodles because it's the most calorically dense available thing. Yeah. So I mostly think about pizza. But there's definitely been times where I'd be thinking about butterflies and think about like what would they do in this situation, and that's actually helped me a lot of times, because I'll be flying in marginal circumstances because I'm just so desperate to make distance because of maybe it's been a bad week and I've been stuck somewhere. But then I realized, like, no, they wouldn't subject themselves to this. It's you're not making enough progress. The conditions are too marginal. Your exposure to risk is too great. Really, what the butterfly would do is they would just suck it up and land, and try to find some food somewhere. And so there's been many circumstances on the expedition where I had to make that kind of a choice. And so definitely I can relate to them in that way. As a pilot, I tend to think more of another kind of being, which is a bird of prey, because us paragliders, it's kind of exciting to talk about. We fly with pretty much the same principles that eagles and hawks, and vultures move through the same space. They don't want to flap if they don't have to, especially the big ones. And so they're looking.
So you're soaring on thermals, right?
They're looking for thermals. They're looking for ridge lift. They're looking for the exact same stuff that we are. They have better glide and better wind penetration, better speed. But at the end of the day, if you're flying, if you can see a vulture or an eagle, you're usually in really good shape, because it means it's the day that is flyable. And if you just follow their lead, you're going to find the lift that you're looking for. Hopefully, they're going the same way.
Oh, that's interesting. So do paragliders keep an eye out for birds of prey generally, or is it just sort of like a good, there's a vulture, or do you kind of like keep an eye out and watch what birds are doing ever when you're up there?
I'm always looking for birds. I'm always looking for birds. And that's what makes, for instance, flying in the Himalayas, I don't want to say easy, because, it's, I don't want to say it's easy, but it for me, it feels a lot more straightforward, because you've got turkey vultures, at least in Nepal and in India where I've flown, that, really just rock the whole airspace there. So whenever you're kind of at a loss and you can't figure out, where your next climb is going to be, you just kind of look around for a large black bird with a pink head, and you just fly that way, because they're always in a thermal somewhere. And the greatest thing about it is that you would think that these small little beings, relatively small beings, would be terrified of a huge, predator bird looking thing like my paraglider, but they're not. Maybe it's kind of like the Galapagos. Maybe there's just never been.
Yeah.
Nothing's ever threatened them, at least not in the sky.
They're just like, if you're up here, you're one of us anyway, right?
Slow one of us. So you're constantly looking for them, and also you are looking for butterflies. Because when butterflies get caught in a thermal, monarch butterflies, they also fly by these same principles. They don't want to be flapping their wings. They're not very aerodynamic. They're not good pilots in that way. They're not like geese flapping all day. They're looking for thermals too. And so it's just a lot less gracious when you see them, because when you see them in a thermal, they're just going up. So you'll just see it in your periphery, literally like a little Post-it note has just gone past you. But if you see that, maybe 30 meters away, if you just fly towards wherever you saw that, you're guaranteed that you're going to find that climb too. And so basically, birds and butterflies.
I was looking through your trip blog and some of your photos, and I was noticing that when you started your flight near the Mexican border up to across the continental U.S., but you were flying in areas that you had never flown in before, that type of region, and never even really been in before. So I wonder if you could speak to that part of the expedition.
Yeah, totally. I guess most of my flying has been done either in Canada or in abroad, like in the Himalayas or in Mexico or in Europe. I haven't done a ton of paragliding in the U.S. Most of what I've done has been in California, and I was so surprised. I didn't realize how much of the U.S. was desert, and that really was a real slap in the face. People that know that Arizona is just completely desert, probably roll their eyes when they hear me say that, but I just didn't know because I'd never been there. I just needed to get from the south to the north, and I needed to follow some mountains. And so it was two things, I'm trying to fly there, and the conditions, the air there is not like any air that I've ever flown in before. I don't know how else to describe this, but everywhere you go, whether it's Mexico or the Himalayas or Canada, everywhere, kind of like they speak a different language with their mouth, or with their mouths, the air kind of speaks a different language as well. And I don't know how else to describe it other than the more you familiarize yourself with those languages, and it takes, a week or two of kind of bumbling around, I find for myself, to really get the flow of it, the more you start to have points of reference. And now if you go to another place, another continent, okay, it's got a new language, but you already know 3 of the aerial languages, so you're probably going to figure that one out fast. So I kind of roll with that kind of confidence now of having flown a little bit everywhere. And man, I just could not I still don't think I know how the air in Arizona especially is supposed to work. It's hot, it's sunny. That means that there should be good climbs, good thermals. The thermals are basically created by the sun heating the earth releasing that up into the atmosphere. Yet somehow I found that the thermals were never where I thought they were going to be. I look for certain kinds of landmarks that are going to be thermic triggers, and I go position myself above them. I look for them, and so many times I just be on the ground, and I think to myself, man, like, what's going on here? And I realize, like, I don't know. I have no idea. And on top of that, I'd be in these situations where I wouldn't even know where I was going to get my next liter of water, and I'd be running out. And so I realized that not only had I had no experience flying in the desert, I was kind of this fool probably bumbling around on days when no one else would be flying, but also I'm on the ground, and I don't even know how I'm going to stay alive. I definitely felt like really, really out of my element, and there were many times in Arizona when I really just felt like I was putting myself in danger, really, and that I was just kind of above my, it was above my pay grade in a way.
And was that the slowest section of the trip then? Or was there a slowest section?
Yeah, definitely Arizona. Yeah. It's also, if you look at the route too, it's also the tallest, so it would make sense that it would take the most time.
Right.
But it really was the slowest. I mean, my out of, almost 3,000 kilometers, it took me probably 3 or 4 weeks to complete the first 250. So that's a quarter of the time, but only 10% of the distance that I had to cover, because I'd literally just be stuck there waiting for a week, sometimes even more than a week. And I should also just take a second to throw in that although I did this unsupported, I had the good company of my girlfriend Lindsay Nicole, who came along, and she did me a huge favor and volunteered to document the expedition. That was a good thing and a bad thing. A good thing because she's awesome, and we were able to get some incredible drone footage, especially of a lot of the hiking and flying that I otherwise wouldn't be able to capture. But maybe a bad thing because it definitely was difficult for us to literally just be sitting in the middle of nowhere at the base of a mountain in the desert for a week, and for me to have to try to rationalize wasting my time, but also wasting hers for this effort that really felt so stubborn inside of not understanding why the conditions weren't weren't turning on for me, why I was not able to fly. Was this something that I was actually going to be able to complete?
Yeah, it's actually funny that you mention her right now, because I was looking at my questions and she's up next. Lindsay Nicole was the first person she reached out to me, and this is how we connected. And now she's worked with you on other films too. But this is probably the most involved she's been, is the impression I got.
Yeah, absolutely. She shot B-roll footage for me for the Endless Chain documentary. I met her in Prince George when I was finished. This was the one from Montana to Prince George. And we spent 3 weeks backtracking along the route, going through Jasper and Banff and all throughout the Columbia Valley there. And she did a bunch of great drone work for me there that I mixed into the Endless Chain film. But we wanted to do an even better job of the the Fly Monarcha documentary. And so she actually, took it upon herself to join me from day one, all the way through to the end, which is just an incredible thing for someone to do.
And she drove the length that you were flying, catching drone footage when you were taking off and flying, and B-roll and things like that, right?
That's right. Yeah, she had a van with all of her equipment and that in it. But certainly it was no less work for her inside of that. All of the mountains that I flew from, she actually had to hike up and then hike back down, despite being a competent paraglider pilot herself, to hike with all of her flying gear and all of the camera equipment that she needed to lug around to create the documentary would have been asking too much of her, and also just putting her too much at risk. So she put a lot of miles on her boots.
I have actually seen some other documentaries about paragliders, and the funny thing is sometimes when they say you hike up to the top of the mountain and then you get to paraglide down. So in a lot of ways, like, you get to skip that hard part of going back down again. So actually going up and then hiking back down again might be actually physically harder in a lot of cases.
Well, and psychologically too, because if you think about it, her as a paraglider pilot, she got into the sport because she likes the idea of flying down as well, right? And so to have to hike down with all that weight, definitely for her, would have been very, very challenging.
And how often did you see her throughout the trip? Because you didn't always meet up, right?
It wasn't always possible. Some days I'd see her, every morning and evening kind of thing. But there'd be times when we go, several days easily, where I might have landed somewhere where it was just inaccessible. There's certain of those events. There was certain cases where she couldn't get anywhere close to me. Maybe I'm somewhere deep on a crest in Idaho, and there's just no path there. I couldn't even hike down from there if I wanted to. I just had to land there because of maybe it was a storm or something, and so now I'm just waiting out weather there for a few days. There'd be other circumstances where I might land somewhere, but again, there'd be no trail. So she would, get close to where I was. We'd communicate via inReach, and then she'd launch the drone, 10 minutes before I'm supposed to launch, and then she would capture my launch and flying around that region on the drone. But then I wouldn't actually get to see her. I just see the drone flying around, and then I'd buzz off. Wow. So all of the above, really.
Yeah, congratulations to her. That would be a very big undertaking, and she probably spent a lot of time alone driving around too. Yeah, so hats off to Lindsay. So we talked a little bit about what you learned from about flying, and what you also didn't learn about flying in that area. What did you learn about the butterflies?
Well, the butterflies, my goodness. So, the butterflies, they are absolutely incredible. They have to go through this metamorphosis where they lay their larvae. They can only lay it on this thing called milkweed, which I want to talk about in a second, where because it's the only thing that the caterpillars can eat. And then the caterpillars, they create these cocoons, and then they shed the skin, I think it's 3 times, and then boom, they pop out a butterfly with wet wings. They dry their wings in the sun, then they fly 1,000 kilometers, mate, and then do it again. So they're doing this alongside me. They're doing this over the corn belt of the United States. They don't need mountains to launch from, so they're able to fly their route, which is more central, whereas I was a little bit more west of them. And then the big thing with the butterflies, and I often thought of them when I was, either hungry on a mountaintop, and because I didn't have enough food to get me through the next couple days, or when I was thirsty looking for water because I'm somewhere in the desert and I just, don't know where my next drink is going to come from. The butterflies are dealing with a huge shortage of milkweed across the United States right now. And this is largely due to not so much climate change, but just commercial farming and pesticide use. It's not seen as a productive plant for anything. At the same time, it's the only plant that the monarch butterfly is able to lay their larvae on. It's the only thing that the caterpillars are able to eat when they're as caterpillars before they become, pollinator butterflies. And so because this is disappearing thanks to the large scale farming, it's not a good thing for the butterflies. There's two groups of butterflies. There's the ones that are western monarchs. They're west of the continental divide, and there are ones that are eastern. The western butterflies over the last 20 years have seen a decline of 99%, whereas they used to be counted in the millions when they got down to the Baja. Now they counted last year something around 2,000, and the eastern monarch is not a whole lot better. Over the last 20 years, they're down about 90%, and they measure this by measuring the amount of space that they take up in Mexico when they're down there in hectares. There's 6 sites. Some of them are big, some of them are small, where they go and they do this overwintering thing that we spoke about. And so their numbers are in significant decline. And, there's a lot of people that are trying to help protect them, and have like the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service put them on the endangered species list. But because it was actually just, I think, 2 months ago that they were rejected from that, simply because there's too many other things that need to be put on that list right now. There's not enough space for them.
Wow, that's really telling, isn't it? That there's not enough space on the list.
There's not enough space. There's too many other things that needed to get priority over this butterfly. That one big storm, because their numbers are so low, one big storm could wipe out the species, and then that would be it. So it's not all doom and gloom, because there are lots of places out there that want to support them and their plight to find milkweed by offering people free milkweed seeds that are native to their region. So people that are listening to your podcast can actually, through our website, monarchexpedition.com, they can find a link to get free milkweed seeds that are native to their region. They can spread those in their front yard, their backyard, and what's going to happen is they're going to get butterflies coming through. So that's something that I really want to encourage people to do.
Yeah, that's a really good idea, because at this time, when you were explaining the plight of the monarch butterfly, the whole time in my head I was like, but what can we do? Can we do anything at all? But it is amazing to think that, the answer is yes, and it's just planting some native seeds. I mean, that's incredible.
Yeah, they're free. It's you just throw them out. You don't even have to dig a hole, and you'll end up having monarch butterflies coming through your front yard or your backyard or wherever it is that you live. Your schoolyard.
Yeah, win-win.
and anyone can do it. It doesn't cost anything. It doesn't take a lot of time, and if enough people do it, then it will offset the challenges that are created by the commercial farming. But yeah, it's that kind of a situation. Even the Fish and Game Service also are looking at how willing is the nation on a state and federal level to participate in this effort. And the infamous border wall that went up, that's gone through very sensitive wildlife areas, marsh areas that were huge sanctuaries for the monarchs on their major voyage. And so there's not a lot of regard for them out there. So it's really up to the little person to one by one take it on as become stewards of monarch butterflies. And that's really what I hope to inspire through this story and through the adventure film that I'm working on right now.
Right on. Yeah, so that's the message, really, is to get the messaging out about the endangered monarch. And it's cool because you're doing that in a very exciting way that people get to follow along with an exciting adventure, and then hopefully pick up some knowledge along the way. So the film, since you did it last year, how did the pandemic play out in this trip? So
this was, we started a little less than a year ago, right? Because it was April 1st, for instance. So we, just like everyone, were caught totally off guard. We'd been planning this expedition for a year, getting some of the sponsors lined up and planning a lot of the route stuff, creating some documentary strategies. We were heavily invested. And crossed over the border into the United States. We were in Mexico training, flew back grabbed the van, did some maintenance, crossed over on March the 10th, and beelined it for the border. And so we had just flown back from Mexico to Canada on, I think it was the 6th, maybe the 7th. And, there was no big deal, no masks, no anything. Really just some talk of this thing that was in China and maybe 1 case or 2 cases in the States. And so all of that happened, and there was really no qualms with the crossing down south. And we were in El Paso, where we originally thought we were going to start the expedition. Long story, but had to move it to Arizona. And all of a sudden, it was like overnight. We weren't really paying a whole lot of attention. We were staying at a Walmart parking lot. Next thing we know, there's like police outside the Walmart, and we're like, what's going on? It's because people are fighting over toilet paper. We're like, what? Where are we?
It did happen like that, though. I mean, whether you were paying attention or not, I mean, it did go from 0 to 100.
And not only that, but we all of a sudden we can't even get toilet paper or peanut butter, and so it turned into this really dire situation where we didn't know what we were going to do. Our home in Canada is a school bus, a renovated school bus that I've been living in for the last 10 years, which has allowed me to make this, athlete filmmaker career possible. And that was in storage. So we didn't have anywhere to quarantine. We were literally just homeless adventurers, stuck in Texas. And so we decided that we needed to just use what resources we had, which was our vehicle at the time. This is pre-expedition, and just, get as far away from civilization as possible. And so we loaded up with as many noodles and peanut butter and this and that as we could, because we didn't know if I was even going to be able to access that stuff, on expedition. The plan was that I would, acquire it all myself as normal, but we wanted to have a backup. And basically just consider that on this expedition, our plan is to be as immersed in nature as possible. And if there is a deadly virus going around, then the best place for us to be is going to be as far away from people as possible, and to come into contact with as few people as possible. And so we realized that the way that we could isolate best would actually be to be on expedition, and that the timing of this, as far as when we had crossed down and when things had gotten locked down and what have you, all seemed to align to sort of as if the universe, I felt, was demanding that this thing happen, and it happened now. Because if it didn't happen now, I didn't know when it was going to happen.
Absolutely, yeah. You wouldn't be able to get back across the border. There would be all those problems, and going down there in quarantine. Where would you go? Right? You're not setting yourself up for that type of a trip.
I had no resources available, and now I would be supremely screwed, because right now I wouldn't even be allowed into the United States if I wanted to have, let's say, postpone it by a year. So it was a really crazy situation where we were basically just two homeless adventurers, and realized that really we needed to just go the course, and maybe if we were lucky, this thing wouldn't affect us at all, and we wouldn't affect it at all. And it was hard to imagine, given the kind of the chaos and the panic and the periphery all around us. When we were hunkered down at the Walmart parking lot of Sierra Vista, where we were then van camping, preparing for the start of the expedition. But in the end, basically, as soon as the expedition started, as soon as we hit day one, all of the problems went away. All of that chaos went away. All that noise went away. Save for the times when I had to go into a store or a gas station to replenish my reserves. I can only carry about 14 days of food at a time. I was very much unaware of the circumstance as it was, taking shape. Except for that, I knew that I needed to wear a mask when I went into these stores.
Yeah. In the next issue of Explorer, we actually have a couple writers who did sort of similar things, not quite as long or as far-reaching, but once the lockdowns eased, they took that opportunity to go out into the wilderness and sort of ultimately social distance as far as they possibly could, because some other things were shut down, and so it is interesting to see how people have responded to that in the adventure community. But you're making the film, so when does the film come out?
We hope to have a soft release of the film, sort of for a backers release, where people will be able to access a portion of the film as well as a ton of extras midway through April. Latest, basically, let's just say May 1st. but hopefully like April 15th, a good time to release a paragliding film. And then it'll do festivals basically through to the fall. So hopefully like Banff and stuff like that, hopefully they'll be running again. And then the film will become completely available probably around Christmas time. But people who get on board with the pre-release and all that exciting stuff this spring, they'll be included in all of those releases, and we'll take them along for the exciting journey. So I've been working on that day and night for the last 3 months now. It's really starting to take shape, and I'm super excited because I've really been able to use the inspiration I got from the Monarchs and to incorporate a lot of what I've learned along the way into the lessons that I'm able to create as sort of morals inside of the documentary story.
Yeah, it sounds really fascinating, very very layered. Is Lindsay Nicole involved in the production of the end product?
She is in the way that I'll put a few days work into it, and then we'll take a look at it together, and I'll bounce a whole bunch of stuff off of her, and she'll have some really good ideas of ways that I can make it a little bit more clear. Because sometimes I get a little bit lost in my story and I don't realize that something isn't clear enough. So that's been really helpful. Her main role inside of what we do is making sure that the world around us is aware of what we're doing, and then I kind of live under the rock and just, try to produce the artwork.
Yeah, well, it's going well. She was very proactive reaching out to me, so I'm really glad to have connected. And this is a very fascinating tale, and I'm very much looking forward to checking out the film. Yeah. Is there anything else you want to leave us with about the Monarch Butterfly?
Just, hey, check out monarchexpedition.com, and you can go there and you can see lots of cool photographs. You can find blogs. You can find educational science articles. That's where you're going to find your links to your free seeds. And anyone, in Canada, the States, or Mexico that wants to plant milkweed, super easy. It's free, and you get to have, butterflies in your front yard. So definitely join the butterfly train. And I hope to see you through the film screen.
Absolutely, yeah. For everyone listening, if you're listening to this through a podcast player, go to explore-mag.com/podcasts, and I'll have some of those links available for you to check out Ben's website and some more information about the Monarch Butterfly. Thanks so much for joining me today. That was a very fascinating chat, a very multifaceted chat about paragliding and butterflies and the pandemic and everything that's going on. So I really appreciate your time today.
Oh, thank you so much, David.
Have you ever gone paragliding? Can you relate? Is flight something you long for? Or are you content to leave that up to the Monarch Butterfly? Well, I hope you learned a lot about both. And don't forget to click over to monarchexpedition.com to find out more about the film and the milkweed. I don't know if I'll ever go paragliding, but I know I'll strive to help the Monarchs. Thanks for tuning in today. I'm David Webb, and hey, live the adventure.